Catherine Moreau stood on the marble steps of her father's mansion, arms crossed, mouth twisted in disbelief. Her suitcase, Louis Vuitton, limited edition, stood beside her like an unwilling accomplice. She was 19, accustomed to silk sheets, imported strawberries in winter, and the sound of Parisian jazz wafting through the penthouse suite. Life had always been about choices, hers. Until now. Her father, Vincent Moreau, a billionaire with roots in steel and software, had spent years giving her everything she asked for. Cars, parties, private tutors, trips to Milan for a pair of shoes. But after a humiliating incident involving Catherine throwing champagne on a waiter during a charity gala, something in him snapped. Not in anger, but in resolve. "You're going to the farm," he had said simply. Catherine laughed. He didn't. Now she was staring at a black SUV, idling in the circular driveway. The chauffeur, usually polite and smiling, avoided her gaze. "This is absurd," she spat. "You can't be serious." Vincent appeared in the doorway. No tailored suit today. Jeans, a button-down shirt, and eyes hard as steel. "You're leaving today, Catherine. 3 months. Upstate. No phone. No cards. No connections." She opened her mouth to argue, but he cut her off with a raised hand. "You will work. You will live as they do. And maybe, just maybe, you'll return understanding what value means." The SUV door opened. Catherine hesitated, her nails digging into her palms. Anger bubbled in her chest, but beneath it, something else. A tremor. Not fear exactly, more like being unmoored. With a final glance at her father, who had already turned away, she slid into the car. The ride was long. Hours passed as the scenery shifted from glass and concrete to green fields and weather-worn barns. Catherine tried to connect her phone, but there was no signal. She pounded out a few angry texts to her friends. None went through. The SUV finally turned onto a gravel path, flanked by fences and cows. A farmhouse appeared in the distance, its white paint peeling, roof slightly crooked. A tall woman in denim overalls stood on the porch, arms crossed. Sunburnt, broad-shouldered, expression unreadable. "You're Catherine," she called as the SUV rolled to a stop. Catherine didn't answer. "I'm Ruth. This is my farm. You'll be staying in the guest room. You're expected to work. No excuses." The chauffeur took out her suitcase and set it down with a nod. Without a word, he got back in and drove off. Catherine stared after the SUV. No turning back. Ruth led her inside. The house smelled like fresh bread and old wood. Simple furniture. No marble. No chandeliers. No fragrance diffusers. "Dinner's at 6. We start work at 5:30 sharp. Morning." "You mean before sunrise?" Catherine asked, aghast. Ruth gave her a look that didn't need translating. The room she was led to was modest. A twin bed. A dresser. A small desk. No TV. No mirror. Her suitcase looked wildly out of place. "Sheets are clean. There's a bath down the hall. You get hot water for 10 minutes. Use it wisely." With that, Ruth left. Catherine sat on the bed. For the first time in years, silence filled her ears. Not comfortable, spa-like silence. An unfamiliar, heavy kind. Outside, the sun dipped behind the hills. Her stomach growled, but pride kept her in the room until hunger overpowered it. When she stepped into the kitchen, Ruth and a young man were already eating. Stew. Bread. A jar of something pickled. "Sit," Ruth said without looking up. Catherine obeyed. The young man glanced at her briefly. "Name's Eli. I help Ruth run the place." She nodded, unsure how to reply. Ruth slid a bowl toward her. The stew looked plain. Catherine hesitated, but the smell was surprisingly good. She took a bite. Then another. No one spoke much. No phone buzzed. No background music. She went to bed early, her body unused to the darkness and stillness. Through the thin window, she could hear crickets, a dog barking far away. The sheets were rough, her pillow lumpy. She stared at the ceiling for a long time before sleep found her. It was the first night. She hadn't cried in years. Please subscribe and like if you want to see more videos like this. A metallic clang jolted Catherine awake. Darkness still pressed against the window. She fumbled for her phone before remembering it wasn't there. The old analog clock on the dresser glowed. 4:58 a.m. Another clang. Then footsteps. She groaned, wrapped in the twin bed stiff sheets. Her muscles ached though she had done nothing yesterday. With a deep sigh, she dressed quickly, black leggings, a cashmere hoodie. Outside the room, the hallway was cold, unwelcoming. In the kitchen, Ruth was already sipping coffee, hands wrapped around a chipped mug. Eli was pulling on boots. "Hope you brought work clothes," Ruth said. "Those won't last 10 minutes out there." Catherine glanced down at herself, too proud to respond. They stepped outside into the chill. Morning dew clung to everything. The sky was still dark, pierced only by stars. "Water the garden beds," Ruth said, pointing. "Eli'll show you." The hose was stiff, the spray uneven. Catherine jumped back as water splashed her sneakers. Eli said nothing, just handed her a pair of gloves. Soil was wet, gritty. Her hands stung. By 7:30, her hair clung to her face. Dirt streaked her leggings. She tried to complain once. Ruth hadn't even looked at her. After breakfast, eggs, toast, no coffee for her. They were sent to clean the chicken coop. Catherine gagged at the smell. Feathers and droppings everywhere. A hen pecked her ankle. "You're not going to die," Eli said flatly, handing her a shovel. By noon, her arms trembled. Her back ached. She hadn't checked a mirror, but knew she looked nothing like the girl who'd arrived yesterday. Lunch was silent again. Catherine wolfed down a sandwich. It tasted like the best thing she'd ever eaten. In the afternoon, she followed Eli to mend fences. Wire, hammer, splinters. Sweat beaded on her neck. Once she slipped in the mud and landed hard. Eli didn't laugh. "You okay?" She blinked, surprised by the question. "I guess." He nodded. "Good. We keep going." Dinner was stew again. No complaints this time. Before bed, Ruth handed her a book. "We don't do TV here. This one's about a girl who learned to shut up and grow up. Might be good company." Catherine said nothing. She read until her eyes closed on their own. Sleep came deeper this time, and for the first time in her life, she dreamed of nothing. By the fourth morning, Catherine's hands were blistered, not the kind that came from trying on stilettos at designer boutiques, but raw, weeping wounds along her palms from wielding shovels, lifting crates, and wrestling with stubborn weeds. The gloves offered little protection. Ruth said they built character. Catherine thought they built resentment. Breakfast was oatmeal and hard-boiled eggs. Catherine barely looked up as she ate. Eli poured coffee for Ruth, then for himself. Catherine reached for the pot. Ruth raised an eyebrow. "Earn it." Catherine's hand froze. Then, silently, she pulled it back. Outside, it was another full day of chores. The barn needed sweeping. A storm was coming, which meant the sheep had to be corralled early. The fence line on the west side had collapsed overnight. Eli suspected coyotes. Catherine tried to argue. "I don't know how to fix fences. I don't know anything about sheep, or barns, or any of this." Ruth barely looked at her. "You'll learn. We all did." "I don't want to learn." "Good," Ruth said. "Then you'll remember it better." By mid-morning, she was ankle-deep in hay and sheep droppings. A lamb got loose and bolted across the pasture. Eli chased it down with practiced ease, but made her walk it back on her own. "Hold the legs firm," he said, handing it over. Catherine looked down at the squirming animal, uncertain. "You think life's clean?" Eli asked. "It's messy, and loud, and hard, but it doesn't stop for you." She said nothing, not because she agreed, not yet, but because no one had ever spoken to her that way before, without trying to impress, flatter, or soften the truth. By the time they broke for lunch, she could barely feel her shoulders. Her face was red from the sun, hair matted to her neck, but the sandwich tasted like reward. She ate in silence. Ruth watched her, arms crossed. "You think you're better than this place." Catherine paused mid-bite. "I didn't say that." "You don't have to. You wear it like perfume. But out here, perfume doesn't cover anything. It just mixes with the dirt." Catherine flushed. Her throat tightened, but she swallowed her pride. That afternoon, Ruth handed her a bucket and pointed toward a long wooden trough. "Feed the pigs. Don't spill it. Don't scream when they grunt. They're just hungry, not hostile." Catherine tried not to look disgusted. The pigs were huge, loud, and greedy. One nearly knocked the bucket out of her hands. She yelped and stepped back, slipping again into the mud. This time, Eli chuckled. She glared at him. "You think this is funny?" He shrugged. "A little. But you're learning." She stood, wiping mud from her pants, muttering curses under her breath. Later that night, in her small room, she examined her hands. Blisters, dirt beneath her nails, a scrape on her elbow. Her reflection in the window glass was barely visible, but she could see enough. This wasn't the girl who'd walked out of a penthouse. She pulled out the book Ruth had given her. Its cover was plain. Inside, underlined sentences spoke of failure and growth, pain and stubborn progress. The girl in the story had failed, too, many times. But she hadn't quit. Catherine kept reading. Outside, thunder rolled. The storm arrived at dawn. Thunder cracked like splitting timber, and lightning lanced across the sky in ragged forks. Rain hammered the farmhouse roof in relentless sheets. Catherine lay awake long before Ruth's knock came at 5:15. "Storm's here. Up. We've got animals to move." By 5:30, Catherine stood in the downpour, soaked to the bone in her thin windbreaker. Her teeth chattered. Her boots, borrowed from a shed, were 2 sizes too big, sloshing with mud and water. Eli handed her a rope. "Get the goats into the shed. They hate the thunder. Won't come easy." Catherine opened her mouth to protest, but something in his expression stopped her. It wasn't pity. It wasn't anger. It was something simpler, expectation. The pasture was a mess. Goats darted and bleated, terrified by the wind and thunder. Catherine slipped twice before managing to loop a rope around one of them. The goat kicked, nearly pulling her off balance. She didn't let go. One by one, she herded them inside. Her hair clung to her face, hands trembling from cold and effort. Mud coated her jeans. By the time she finished, Ruth gave her a silent nod of approval. They moved to the chicken coop next, salvaging feed from a collapsing shed. Rain had turned the ground to mush. Catherine's arms ached from lifting sacks of grain. Her shoulders screamed with every motion. Still, she didn't stop. By late morning, the worst had passed. The rain softened to a drizzle. Catherine stood on the porch, clutching a warm mug of something Eli called field tea, a strong herbal blend with honey and mint. Her fingers were red and raw, but she didn't care. For once, she wasn't thinking about how she looked. She was thinking about how she'd done it. All of it. She'd endured. Inside, Ruth dried off by the fireplace. "You surprised me this morning. Didn't think you'd last 5 minutes." Catherine said nothing, sipping the tea. Ruth chuckled. "You're stubborn. I like that." That afternoon was cleanup. Catherine helped Eli sweep the barn, rake hay, and reset fallen tools. They didn't talk much, just the scrape of rakes, the low shuffle of boots on wet earth. At one point, Eli broke the silence. "You miss home." Catherine hesitated. "I'm not sure what that even means anymore." He nodded as if he understood. Maybe he did. Later, they repaired the fence that had collapsed in the night. Eli showed her how to drive nails through damp wood, how to stretch and twist wire without cutting her hands. Her fingers bled anyway. She didn't complain. That night, Ruth made stew again. Catherine didn't even flinch. She ate like someone who'd earned every bite. When she reached for the coffee pot, Ruth didn't stop her. "You earned it today." Catherine blinked, then poured herself a cup. It was bitter and strong. She liked it. After dinner, she sat on the porch steps. The air was clean, the kind of clean no city could replicate. The stars began to emerge, sharp and quiet. She didn't miss her phone, didn't miss the noise. Eli sat beside her after a while. "You know," he said, "most people who come here, they don't last a week." "I thought I wouldn't either," she admitted. "But you did." She smiled faintly. "I think I needed to fail at everything I thought I was good at before I could do anything real." Eli didn't reply. He didn't need to. They sat in silence until the moon rose. By the end of her second week, Catherine no longer needed to be told when to wake. The rhythm of the farm had embedded itself into her bones: sunrise, chores, meals, sunset, sleep. Her body was sore in places she hadn't known could ache, but her movements were steadier now. There was less hesitation in her hands. Ruth noticed. So did Eli. That morning, she milked the goats without flinching, swept the barn before breakfast, and washed her own clothes in the old tin sink behind the house. It wasn't grace, it was grit. After lunch, Ruth handed her an envelope. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. Her father's. She stared at it for a long moment before opening it. The letter was short. "Catherine, I hope the work is hard and the air is clean. I hope you found silence and strength. This isn't punishment. It's a chance. Your mother would have wanted you to know this life, the one without drivers, filters, or handouts. You have more in you than money could ever buy. P.S. The trust is still frozen. Earn it. Dad." She folded the paper slowly and placed it back in the envelope. Her hands trembled, not from exhaustion, but from the unexpected clarity. He hadn't written to pull her back. He wasn't offering comfort. He was forcing her to confront the truth. Catherine didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because she finally understood the point. That evening, she helped Eli with the tractor. A belt had slipped loose, and he needed an extra pair of hands. She held the wrench steady as he adjusted the tension. "You okay?" he asked after a while. "Yeah," she said. "I got a letter from my father." Eli didn't look up. "Good news?" "No, but maybe the kind I needed." He nodded. "That's usually the right kind." Dinner was quiet. Ruth had made cornbread and greens. Catherine cleaned her plate without a word. When she stood to do dishes, Ruth stopped her. "Take a walk. Eli will handle this." Eli smirked. "Will I?" Ruth raised an eyebrow. "You will." Outside, the dusk was warm and still. Catherine walked the gravel path past the barn, through the orchard. The apple trees were beginning to flower. She ran her fingers over the leaves, stopping at the edge of the pasture. She stood there a long time, staring into the fading light. The girl who had arrived in designer boots and silk wasn't gone, but she was quieter now, more watchful. She didn't need to be seen to feel real. As the sun dipped below the horizon, she whispered, "I can do this." Not to prove anything, not to win her father's trust back, but because something deep inside her had shifted. She wanted to earn it for herself. When she returned to the house, Eli was finishing the dishes. Ruth sat by the fire, knitting in silence. Catherine joined her, saying nothing. After a moment, Ruth glanced at her. "You staying?" Catherine didn't hesitate. "Yes." Ruth nodded. "Good." And that was that. The days grew warmer. Spring peeled back the cold with slow, stubborn hands, and the landscape around the farm began to soften. Blossoms clung to branches like shy promises, and the soil beneath Catherine's boots finally lost its frostbitten bite. With the change in weather came a new cycle of work, one she was expected to meet head-on. Her routine now started before the sun. She didn't need Ruth's knock anymore. She was up before the rooster, layering into her worn flannel and sliding into boots that, though still too big, no longer felt like strangers on her feet. Eli handed her a seed bag. "You ever plant anything before?" Catherine shook her head. He gestured to the road earth behind the barn. "Good. Then you won't do it wrong out of habit." They worked side by side in silence. Catherine followed his method. Thumb-length holes, evenly spaced, a pinch of seed, cover tamp. Her knees ached. The sun burned her neck. But she didn't stop. By the 5th row, her rhythm was clean. By the 10th, she had found something close to peace in the repetition. Dirt beneath her nails no longer seemed like grime. It felt like proof. Late that afternoon, Ruth called her into the farmhouse. The kitchen smelled of lemon soap and brewed tea. A stack of receipts lay on the table, along with a small notepad covered in Ruth's careful handwriting. "I need help with the books," Ruth said without looking up. Catherine blinked. "You want me to do the accounting?" "You know numbers, don't you?" Ruth asked. "That college of yours teach anything useful?" "I majored in marketing." "Then this'll be new for both of us." Catherine sat down, pulled the receipts toward her, and started categorizing. Feed costs, repair bills, equipment rentals. It was messy but familiar in its own way. By dinner, she had found 2 duplications and 1 overpayment. Ruth raised an eyebrow when Catherine explained. "Huh," she muttered. "Looks like you might be good for more than manure and fence wire." Catherine smirked. "Don't forget goat wrestling." The next day, Eli taught her how to drive the tractor. It stalled 3 times before she got it moving. On the 4th try, she lurched forward and almost plowed into the barn. He didn't laugh. "You're learning. Messy means progress." They drove in wide loops across the field, flattening furrows and turning soil. Catherine's hands gripped the wheel tight, but she didn't flinch when it bucked. When they parked, Eli looked at her. "You know, first week I thought you'd be gone by now." "I almost was." "What changed?" Catherine thought for a moment. "I got tired of waiting for someone to fix me. Figured I should try doing it myself." He nodded, saying nothing, but the respect in his silence was louder than any praise. One evening, Ruth showed her the ledger of the farm's last 10 years. Red ink bled through the pages. "Your father keeps us running," she said quietly. "Every winter, he sends enough to pay off the debt, but he won't do it forever." Catherine looked at the numbers, the weight of them. For the first time, the farm didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like something endangered. "We could pivot," she said slowly. "Start a co-op. Maybe direct-to-market produce. A brand. You've got the land. We just need a story people want to support." Ruth studied her. That city brain finally doing something useful? Maybe. Ruth didn't smile, but her eyes flicked with the faintest glimmer of approval. That night, Catherine didn't sleep. She lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling above her bed, the scent of soil still lingering on her skin. The numbers rattled around in her mind. The possibilities. The future. She got up just before dawn and started writing a business plan. There was no guarantee the farm could be saved. No guarantee her father would thaw the trust. But that wasn't the point anymore. She wasn't here for the money. She was here to become someone worth trusting, with or without it. The day started with a strange stillness. There was no breeze. No sound of birdsong. The animals were quiet, unusually so. Even Ruth and Eli exchanged wary glances over their morning coffee. Catherine felt it too, that fragile sense of anticipation, like the pause before a curtain lifts. By noon, the wind returned, but it carried something different, the dry, metallic tang of smoke. Eli stepped outside and scanned the horizon. Brush fire. North Ridge. Ruth didn't wait. We need to clear the west field. If it jumps the creek, we'll lose everything. Catherine grabbed her gloves, without being told. They worked fast. Shovels, rakes, buckets, anything that could carve out a firebreak. The sun beat down mercilessly. Sweat mixed with soot. Catherine's hands blistered within the hour. She ignored the pain. Then the wind shifted. Flames licked the treetops less than a mile off. A wall of smoke rolled toward them like a stampede. Catherine's lungs burned. Visibility dropped to yards. Ruth shouted, "Tractor now. Get the goats to the south pasture." Eli was already halfway to the barn. Catherine followed, untying the pen gates. The goats bolted into the smoke, and she ran with them, coughing, stumbling. They reached the clearing near the creek. Eli waved her down. "We'll be safe here." They watched from behind a wall of ash as the fire climbed the ridge. For an hour, no one spoke. Just wind, flame, and fear. By nightfall, the fire was contained. They lost a storage shed, a quarter-acre of fence. But the house, the barn, and the field survived. Catherine stood in the dark yard staring at the scorched tree line. Her clothes reeked of smoke. Her arms ached from the effort, but her heart pounded with something raw and sharp, pride. She had helped save something real. Inside, Ruth poured water into a basin. Catherine washed her face slowly, watching blackened water swirl down the drain. Eli sat by the fireplace, silent, brushing soot from his jeans. Ruth studied her. "You didn't run." "I didn't think about it," Catherine said honestly. "That's the difference now." Catherine nodded. A week later, her father called. The voice on the other end of the line was calm, measured. "I heard about the fire. Ruth said you didn't leave." "I didn't." He was quiet a moment. "And you're still there?" "Yes." "Why?" Catherine glanced out the window. The pasture was healing. New green pushing through black soil. "Because I needed to prove to myself that I could be more than what I was." Another pause. Then, "I'm proud of you." The words hit harder than she expected. He continued, "The trust isn't the point anymore. I see that now. If you still want access, you'll have it. But I think you've already found something better." Catherine didn't answer right away. She was crying and didn't want him to hear it. That night, she stood outside the barn, watching the stars blink to life. Eli joined her, handing over a cup of coffee. "You staying?" he asked. "I think I'm building something here." "Good." They stood in silence. No need for more. In the distance, the first goat cried out. Somewhere behind her, Ruth was baking again. The farm was still breathing. And so was she. The seasons rolled on, as they always did. The work was never-ending. Catherine had learned that much. She had also learned that there was no place for pride or resentment in this life. It wasn't a question of whether or not you were willing to work. It was a matter of doing it without expectation, without complaint. Every day, she woke before the sun, and every night, she collapsed into bed with dirt-streaked hands and aching muscles. And she was happy. The farm, once an alien world to her, had become her home. She understood the language of the land now. How to read the clouds, to recognize the signs of drought or rain. She no longer flinched when the goats charged at her, or when the smell of the barn hit her in the face. It was all part of the rhythm. But there were moments when the weight of what she had chosen pressed down on her chest. She thought of the life she'd left behind, of the glamour, the convenience, the luxury, and it felt like an ache, deep and heavy. It was a life that had once been hers, and yet it now seemed so far away. One afternoon, as she watered the vegetable garden, Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from her mother. "Your father's been talking to the board. They want to know if you're coming back. They're ready to thaw the trust, Catherine. You could come home." Her heart twisted, and for a moment, she stood frozen, the water hose limp in her hands. The world felt smaller suddenly, more fragile. A decision had already been made for her. And yet, she didn't know what to choose. She stared at the screen, feeling the familiar weight of expectation pull at her, her father's voice echoing in her mind. "You've got more in you than money could ever buy." It was the first time she truly understood what he had meant. She put the phone down, the message still unread. When Eli found her a while later, standing in the garden, staring at the ground, he didn't ask what was wrong. He just stood next to her, quiet as ever. Finally, she spoke. "I got a message from my mom. My dad's offering me the trust. If I come back to the city, if I leave all this behind." Eli didn't say anything at first. He just turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "And what are you going to do?" he asked quietly. Catherine hesitated. She couldn't answer right away. Not because she didn't know, but because the answer felt so much bigger than any words could hold. "I don't know," she said at last. "I didn't come here to leave. But I'm not sure if I can stay." He nodded slowly. "It's your choice. But whatever you choose, it's yours. And you won't be the same person after you've made it." Catherine watched as he walked away, his boots kicking up dirt. His words lingered in the air like a challenge. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Catherine went to the barn, where she found Ruth kneeling in front of the rows of empty shelves. "The feed store's behind," Ruth said, not looking up. "The shipments got delayed. We're going to have to go into town tomorrow." Catherine paused. Then, without thinking, she asked, "Do you need help?" Ruth looked at her then, her eyes soft. "You already have been, Catherine, in ways you don't even know." The next morning, they made the trip to town. It was a long drive, and as they approached the small grocery store, Catherine noticed how the building seemed so much more familiar now. She didn't feel out of place anymore. The hustle and bustle of the town, once a distant memory, now felt like a part of her. She helped Ruth load the supplies into the truck, and when they returned, the farm seemed different, new even. The tasks didn't seem so daunting anymore. She could feel the farm breathing with a rhythm that wasn't as foreign as it had once been. The next few days passed in a blur of work, each task more familiar, each day a little less overwhelming. And yet, despite all that, Catherine couldn't shake the decision that hung over her, like a shadow. One evening, after a long day in the fields, she sat on the porch, watching the sun fade into the night. Her fingers curled around a cup of tea, the steam rising in gentle spirals. She knew the time had come. It wasn't the money. It wasn't the prestige of the city, or the security of the trust. It wasn't the life she had been born into. It was the life she was building. Catherine had spent so long feeling lost, always searching for validation outside herself. But now, she understood that it wasn't the things that made life worth living. It wasn't the luxuries or the privileges. It was the people who worked beside you, the land you tended, and the sense of purpose that came from living a life you chose for yourself. She had become someone she could be proud of, someone who had chosen the hard way, but the right way. And with that knowledge, she smiled to herself and set her cup down. She knew what she had to do. The morning after her quiet revelation, Catherine woke with a sense of finality. The decision was made, but there was no dramatic moment, no grand gesture. It was a quiet thing, an internal shift, a recognition of who she had become and the life she had found for herself. The farm had transformed her in ways she had not anticipated, and the pull of the city, of the life her father promised, no longer felt like a beckoning. It felt like a distraction. She had walked a long road from the woman who had stepped off the plane and into the dirt of the farm. And now, for the first time, she could see where that road led. As she pulled on her boots and slipped into the worn flannel shirt that had long since lost its newness, Catherine felt no hesitation. She had learned, through sweat and toil, that life was more than a destination. It was the way you walked to get there, step by step, day by day. And each step she had taken had brought her to this moment. By mid-morning, Catherine was standing in front of the farmhouse, watching Ruth and Eli load the truck for the day's errands. Eli greeted her with a nod, his face unreadable, but Ruth caught her eye. The older woman's look held something between expectation and understanding, as if Ruth knew something Catherine had not yet voiced. "Going to do it?" Ruth asked quietly. Catherine met her gaze, the weight of the question sitting heavy between them. "Yeah," Catherine said, her voice steady. "I'm not going back. I think I'm home." Ruth smiled, her mouth softening at the edges. "Took you long enough. Welcome to the family, kid." Catherine couldn't help but laugh, a sound that felt like the first laugh she'd ever truly shared with Ruth. The tension between them had eased over the past few weeks, and Catherine had realized, as Ruth had shown her in countless small ways, that she had never been an outsider. Ruth had known from the beginning what Catherine had yet to discover, that you couldn't just leave one world behind for another. You had to take the best of both with you. Later that day, after a long conversation with Ruth and Eli about the future of the farm, Catherine felt a new sense of ownership, not just of the land, but of her life. She realized that she could do more than just survive here. She could help build something meaningful, something that mattered, something that would stand the test of time. The farm would be her legacy. Her father's call, once such a tempting offer, now seemed far away, irrelevant even. She had nothing to prove to him anymore. What she had learned in the past months could never be bought. It could only be lived. Catherine walked to the barn and stood in the doorway, taking in the smells and sounds of the place that had become her life. Her gaze fell on the fields that stretched beyond, the dirt that had been so foreign to her at first now familiar and comforting beneath her feet. She had worked for it all, and now it was hers in a way that felt solid and true. The sun hung low on the horizon, and as Catherine stood there, watching the farm settle into twilight, she realized that the future was a series of choices, and this one, her choice, was the first real one she had made for herself. It was only the beginning. The days blurred together as summer made its slow, inevitable arrival. Catherine's life on the farm had solidified into something that felt both simple and profound. She had learned the art of patience, of resilience, and of finding beauty in the unremarkable. Her mornings began with the rising sun, the familiar rhythm of chores, and the quiet, unspoken bond between her and the land. Ruth, Eli, and Catherine had worked side by side, each day building upon the last. The co-op idea was beginning to take shape, and with every small success, the farm was inching closer to the future that Catherine had envisioned. They were still far from financial security, but Catherine no longer saw that as a barrier. The farm was more than an investment, it was a way of life. And for the first time in a long while, she could feel the promise of that life stretching out before her. Her father never called again. There were no more texts or offers to return, to step back into the life she had once known. At first, there had been a quiet ache at the back of her mind, a question of whether she had made the right choice. But that ache had slowly faded as her sense of purpose on the farm grew stronger. One evening, Ruth called her into the kitchen. The sun had set, and the farmhouse was bathed in a soft amber glow. A faint smell of fresh bread lingered in the air, and the world outside had quieted, save for the sound of the crickets in the fields. "I've been thinking," Ruth said, as Catherine sat down at the table. "It's time for us to really commit to this, make it official. We need more help to get the farm to where it can be self-sustaining, and I think you're the one to lead that charge." Catherine's heart skipped a beat. You want me to run the farm? Ruth nodded. You've already been doing it. You've got ideas, a plan, and the drive. It's time to make it real. Catherine sat back, taking in Ruth's words. There was no hesitation now. She had already made her peace with the life she had chosen, and now it seemed like she was stepping into something bigger, something that could grow beyond her wildest expectations. I'm ready, she said, the weight of the words settling into her chest. Let's make this work. In the coming months, they poured everything they had into the farm. They worked the land with renewed energy, planting new crops, expanding the co-op, and forming partnerships with nearby markets. Catherine took on the role of managing the books, while Ruth continued to oversee the practicalities, and Eli took care of the farm's day-to-day needs. There were setbacks, of course, bad weather, late shipments, and the occasional surprise expense. But Catherine had learned that failure was just another part of the process. The key was getting back up. As the farm began to thrive, Catherine felt the weight of the responsibility settle on her shoulders. But it was a weight she carried with pride. She knew that her father's wealth, though tempting, could never compare to the satisfaction of this life. The life she had worked for, the life she had chosen. And one day, months later, as Catherine stood at the edge of the field, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of pink and orange, she realized something. She had become the person her father had always wanted her to be, but not in the way he had imagined. She had become someone who valued hard work over ease, connection over convenience, and legacy over money. She had built something of her own, from the ground up, and in that moment, as the wind tousled her hair and the sounds of the farm echoed around her, she knew she had found her place in the world. Her father had taught her one important thing, the power of wealth. But it was the farm, the people around her, and the quiet pride she felt in every decision she made that had shown her the true meaning of success. With that knowledge, Catherine stepped into the future. She wasn't just a woman who had been saved by the farm. She was the woman who had saved it. And in doing so, she had saved herself. The farm had become her legacy, and she, in turn, had become a part of it.